The marble countertops were so polished I could see my own exhausted face staring back. It was my first day, and I was cleaning the penthouse of the billionaire, Michael McGrahm. You know, the guy who owns about half of New York City. I was a nobody, just the new girl who was supposed to stay invisible. Scrub, polish, and blend into the background of a life I couldn't even imagine. The head housekeeper, a woman with a face that looked like it was carved from granite, laid out the rules pretty clearly. Don't touch anything you're not paid to clean. Don't talk to anyone unless they talk to you first. And under any and all circumstances, do not bother Mr. McGrahm. He was a man who treasured his privacy, a man everyone knew was carrying some kind of heavy, unspoken sadness. Honestly, I was just grateful for the job. It was my one chance to build a real life for myself, far away from the cold, echoing halls of my past. I was supposed to be invisible, remember? But then I saw it. It was on a wall filled with fancy family portraits, all these perfect, smiling McGrahm faces staring back. And right there among them was a face I hadn't seen in 11 years, a face I knew better than my own. He was younger in the picture, smaller, but his eyes? I knew those eyes. Those were the same eyes that used to search for me in the dark when he was scared. The air caught in my lungs and a sound tore out of my throat before I could possibly stop it. "Sir, that boy? He lived with me in the orphanage." The words just hung there in the massive, silent hall. Then I heard them, heavy, angry footsteps. Michael McGrahm stormed out of his study, his face a total thundercloud. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. He was a seriously intimidating guy, tall, broad, with eyes that could freeze you on the spot. I was completely terrified, shaking from head to toe. I knew I'd broken every single rule. This was it. I was getting fired before my first day was even over. Tears were streaming down my face as I lifted a shaky hand toward the wall. "The portrait," I stammered. "That boy, I knew him." McGraham's eyes followed my finger and his whole expression went cold. "That is my brother, Leo," he said, his voice clipped. "He's gone." "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "His name, it was Sam. We were at St. Jude's orphanage together. I was there. I looked after him." The little brass plaque under the painting said, "Leo McGrahm, 2008 to 2014. The dates were wrong. The name was wrong, but I knew that face. With this painful stiffness, Mr. McGrahm explained the portrait was a digitally aged picture he'd had made years ago. A ghost on his wall. His younger brother, Leo, had been kidnapped from their family home 11 years back. He was never found, just presumed lost. He just stared at me, his icy mask finally starting to crack. He must have seen my worn-out shoes and my cheap uniform, but I think he also saw the truth in my eyes. The anger in his face just melted. It was replaced by a flicker of something I couldn't quite place. It looked like a desperate, fragile hope. "Tell me everything," he commanded, but his voice was now just a broken whisper. So I told him. I told him everything about a little boy named Sam who showed up at the orphanage with no memory of who he was, just this deep, constant sadness in his eyes. He was so small and scared, always an easy target for the bigger kids, but I never let them near him. I was only a kid myself, but in that place, I was his protector. For a second, the fancy penthouse faded away and I was back inside the damp, gray walls of St. Jude. I could almost smell the bleach in the thin, watery soup we got for dinner. I remembered sneaking Sam my bread when his was stolen and telling him stories at night until he'd fall asleep, his tiny hand clutched in mine. We used to dream about being adopted together, about finally getting a real family. He'd always draw pictures of a big house with a red roof and a huge piano inside, a memory he couldn't explain but just felt in his heart. The worst memory, the one I always pushed away, was the day he left. A stern-faced woman and the man in a cheap suit showed up. They said a wonderful family had adopted him. I hugged him goodbye, my own heart completely shattering. I promised him I'd find him someday. He was crying, begging them to take me with him, but they just pulled him away. That was the last time I ever saw him. I was left all alone with nothing but the memory of a promise he'd made to buy a big house for us to live in together someday. The whole time I was talking, Mr. McGram just listened. He didn't interrupt, not once. He just watched me, his jaw tight and his hands clenched into fists. For the first time, I wasn't just the maid. I was the only person who knew what happened to the brother he thought he'd lost forever. The next morning, Mr. McGram's car was waiting for me. I wasn't being sent home, fired. I was being driven back to the one place I'd sworn I'd never return to, St. Jude's Orphanage. The building was mostly abandoned now, just a skeleton full of ghosts. But Mr. McGram's money and resources had tracked down the one person who might have answers, a retired nun named Sister Agnes, who'd worked there for 50 years. We found her in a quiet little nursing home. She was frail, but her eyes were still sharp. At first, she didn't want to talk. The past was full of pain, she said. But I pleaded with her, describing Sam, the way his eyes lit up when he smiled, the way he always held my hand. Finally, Sister Agnes let out a heavy sigh. She told us the dark secret of St. Jude's. The boy, Sam, had arrived with amnesia after being found near a bus station. They just gave him a new name. But he was never adopted. The orphanage's director back then was a corrupt man who took payments to make certain children disappear. Sam's adoption paperwork was a fake, leading to a family that didn't exist. It was all for a big, untraceable donation. The director had covered his tracks perfectly, and a suspicious fire later destroyed any files that could have him exposed. Michael's face went pale with rage. His brother hadn't gone to a loving home. He'd been sold, discarded, and renamed. That little flicker of hope in his eyes was now a fire. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a new kind of determination. He said, "Ilara, the trail didn't end here. It begins here." And it was the first time he'd ever used my name. For the next week, that penthouse was like a war room. Using the fake adoption papers and the director's name, Michael's team of investigators dug through everything. They combed through decades-old bank records, property deeds, and old rumors. And then they got a hit. A house bought through a shell company by the corrupt director, then transferred to a couple in a quiet town 3 hours away. A couple with no official record of any children. My heart was pounding against my ribs the whole drive there. What were we going to find? Would he even be there? After all this time, would he even remember me? Michael McGram was silent next to me, gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles were white. The house was small and modest with a nice lawn, a world away from a McGram mansion, but it looked like a home. We walked up the front path and I felt like my legs were made of lead. Michael McGram raised his hand and knocked. The door swung open, and there he was. He was a younger man now, maybe 22, but he had the same kind eyes I remembered. He looked from me to the imposing man beside him with a confused frown. He didn't recognize the billionaire, but his eyes kept flicking back to my face. I could see something in them, a tiny flicker of a memory trying to break through. Michael McGraham's voice was thick with emotion. He pulled an old, creased photo from his wallet. 2 little boys, one a bit older, standing next to a grand piano. "Leo?" he asked, the name sounding like a prayer. His eyes went wide. He looked from the photo to my face and then back to Michael McGraham. You could almost see the puzzle pieces of a life he never knew he'd lost finally clicking into place. A single tear rolled down his cheek. "Michael?" he whispered. Months have passed. It wasn't a simple, happy ever after reunion. Leo, or Sam as he'd known himself, had been raised by a family who, it turned out, were victims of the scheme too. They were told he was an orphan with no family, but the bond between brothers, even after being stretched to its breaking point, was still there. They're healing, and they're doing it together. As for me, my life has completely changed. Mr. McGraham insisted I wasn't his maid anymore. He said I was family. He's given me a life of comfort and security I could only have dreamed of, but he gave me something even better. He started the St. Jude Foundation in my name, a charity focused on protecting vulnerable kids and fixing the broken systems that fail them. I'm now a director, and my life finally has a real purpose, making sure no kid ever feels as lost and alone as Sam and I once did. Sometimes I'll stand in that grand hall and look at a new portrait on the wall. This one isn't a composite. It's a real photo of Michael, Leo, and me, all standing together. We're 3 people from completely different worlds, tied together by the past and looking toward the future. It's a daily reminder that family isn't just about blood. It's about the promises you keep and having the courage to speak up when you see a familiar face. Has a single moment ever changed your entire life? I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. And please subscribe for more stories that prove hope can be found in the most unexpected places.